Andrew, thank you again so much for participating in Project Earth. We really do appreciate your time, expertise, and knowledge, and believe that it will be enriching and will add to the growing conversations around biodiversity, climate action, and conservation. I think to get us started, and based on your work and interests, is there a way for us to go back to a time where agricultural soil and planetary health was at its peak? And I'm asking this primarily because there's a lot of doom and gloom that is associated around things to do with the environment and climate change.
Yeah, there is a lot of doom and gloom, and we do need to focus on solutions that give people hope. And I think that's for me, one of the amazing things about an agricultural / soil solution is that it is accessible to so many people, and it can give people great hope. In terms of going back to planetary peak health, it's a common thing in studying nature is when was that? To draw a political analogy, Trump wants to make America great again, and as the comedians always ask him, like, when was it great? And so yeah, what are we going to? What I want to aim to is a level of planetary health that keeps the planet in a situation which is habitable to large mammals like ourselves, large land-based mammals like ourselves. And so that is my focus. And our problem is that, with our very large brain, we have developed a lot of technology that enables us to make a lot of negative impacts on the planet. We need to be aware of that, and use that technology and use that brain to turn that around. And I think that the soil thing is so important because one of the things that makes us so powerful as humans is that we touch the soil. And when I think of soil, I think of the soil plant ecosystem. It's one thing. You can't have soil without plants, and you can't have plants without soil. And we have an incredible ability to break that ecosystem. We can make deserts, we can deforest forests, we can farm savannas and grasslands in very poor ways, and really negatively impact that relationship. When the vast majority of us have no understanding of how important that relationship is in maintaining the planet in a habitable condition, in a position where the natural cycles of the planet are happening and keeping the environment and the climate stable enough, the water cycles working, the carbon cycles working, the oxygen cycles, all of these things working in such a way that it stabilizes the ecosystem that we require to exist here. And yeah, I do think that we can turn this around. We just have to change our way of thinking. And I say just with all due respect to how difficult it is to get to change humans' ways of thinking. But I do think we have enough time, and this is where I draw great purpose from. I have young children, and I'm worried about the state of the planet that they're going to end up on after I'm gone. It is possible. I think my optimism comes from the incredibly short space of time that I've seen ecosystems turn around and recover when given the opportunity. So soil microbiology and nature in general are incredibly forgiving, and if we just stop trying to break them the whole time and work on working on their side, on empowering that ecosystem, we can really make in very short time, I'm talking a few years, we can turn farmland from being a negative mark on the planet to offering good ecosystem services again to keep the planet habitable.
Thank you so much for that response. I really like the optimism in your response. The fact that you talked about the relationship that we need to have with the planet and sort of that analogy to sort of making the earth great again and how this can be done within a few short number of years. That's something to look forward to and something to strive forward to. Okay. So when thinking about climate change, which you alluded to in our first question, and its effects, one might also consider soil degradation. In your opinion, what would be the most significant factors contributing to soil degradation, and how can we mitigate those?
I think the single biggest factor, and I mentioned it before, is ignorance. People don't know what soil is, and we talk of, we don't really have a word in South Africa for this. It's an American word, dirt. Soil as dirt rather than soil. Gravel and dust and other things don't really grab it in a way that dirt does, that sort of dismissive way of saying dirt. In fact, most farmers on the planet don't think soil is a living thing. They simply think it's a medium in which they grow food with external inputs. That's a serious problem. And really, it comes down to, you don't know what you don't know. And we need to change that situation, and we need to change the way people look at farmers. If you look at the narrative in the media, farmers are bad people. They're ruining the planet. And farmers are doing this, and farmers are doing that, and farmers, at the end of the day, farmers are people at the bottom end of a food chain that, farmers didn't invent fertilizer, farmers didn't invent pesticides, farmers didn't invent, any of these things that people don't like, people who are aware don't like. We as a whole society developed them. We as a whole society politically voted for cheap food. We as a whole society moved in that direction. And if we can change our thinking about those farmers, I think there's like 600 odd million farmers on the planet. And they directly impact 70% of the accessible soil on the planet. So think, if we could stop thinking of them as bad people and think of them as potential healers of the land. And that would require a change of mindset of non-farming people, of government, of NGOs, of civil society, etc. And then it would also require a change on the farmer's side. So there are lots of things that we do to break soil. Okay, and I can list all of those and go into those. But really, what is the biggest factor? The biggest factor is ignorance. And sorry, didn't turn my phone off. The biggest factor is ignorance, and people not knowing how important this plant-soil relationship is for all of us.
I think you've raised some really good points. You alluded to ignorance in your first question, and it came up again here. And I was particularly sort of interested when you were talking about soil and the fact that here in Southern Africa, there isn't a direct translation, and how soil has been equated to dirt. So we don't think of it in very positive terms. We think of it in very negative terms. And because of that, it contributes to our ignorance about the soil and the impact that it has on our livelihoods, on our eating habits. And also this idea of like changing our mentality and our thinking towards farmers who hold, as you said, 70% of, arable farmland. They're the ones who feed us. And, if we have those negative opinions of them, that's not going to do very much for us in the long run, I think. So thank you for that. So we've touched on, yes, you can continue.
No. And it's, it comes up later, I think, in one of your questions, but so I'll just leave it there and we'll go there later.
Okay, not a problem. Okay, so we've touched on soil degradation, and perhaps we can turn to soil restoration, which is part of the work that you actually do. How does restoring agricultural soil impact on broader environmental and public health outcomes?
So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I literally don't think there is a bigger agent of impact on
Okay.
on the environment and public health, because
Mm.
the soil plant ecosystem, everyone just thinks about food, okay?
Mhm.
And, and it does so much more than that. And it's quite
Mm.
complicated, the ecosystem services that it delivers to us. So let's just simplify it and go down to three: food, oxygen,
Mm.
and water. Okay. Now, without that ecosystem photosynthesizing and driving the production of food, the cycling of oxygen, and the cycling of water, um, we would slowly lose access to all of those things.
Mm.
And no food, no oxygen and water, no environment, no public health.
Mm.
So, the thing is that once you realize that we live on a biologically run planet, okay?
Mhm.
If you look at soil, it's physical, it's chemical, and it's biological. Those are the components that science breaks soil up into. And
Mhm.
biology is complicated, and especially long ago when we didn't have lots of nice equipment to help us with this, it was a lot easier to focus on the physical and the chemical, and we made chemical fertilizers, and we were going to, solve all of our problems forever with chemical
Mhm.
fertilizers and poisons, um, which is a strange way of thinking that you're going to solve all your
Mhm.
problems with poison. Um,
Mhm.
and so we were going to go and do that, and we just left biology out of the equation. But biology runs the planet. And there's that old song of the knee bones connected to the thigh bone,
Mhm.
et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. And that is biology. Biology is loops, forward loops, backward loops, all linking together um, to make an ecosystem function. And our problem as human beings is our hubris has developed to the degree where we no longer think we're part of nature. We think we sit above nature
Mhm.
and we control it. We are just part of it. We're part of that ecosystem. Um, we're just a very bright and dangerous part of it that has the ability to mess things up. But
Mhm.
we also have the ability to fix them.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I think that that once again, the power we have to mess up our planet is that we touch the soil every day, the soil plant
Mhm.
ecosystem. We also can touch it positively,
Mhm.
and that's where we need to be looking.
Mhm. I really like when you said that we sort of think of ourselves above nature, which is probably the wrong way to consider ourselves, especially when you're talking about the ecosystems that we have. We're actually a part of that ecosystem. So we can't think of ourselves as outside of that ecosystem, but a part of it. And then also when you talked about biology and the fact that we've sort of left that out and we've only concentrated on the physical attributes and the chemical attributes, it's interesting to see how we can't leave out anything when we're thinking about the environment, about conservation. Everything has its place and its merit. And it was nice that that actually came up in your response. So thank you for that. Okay. Um, could you share with us some of the successful methods or innovations in terms of soil restoration, particularly those that you think show a lot of promise?
Yeah, so there are multiple methods of soil restoration and regeneration.
Mm.
Um, firstly, different levels of degradation also, as well as
Mm.
different methods of fixing things. So
Okay.
if you're on the one hand talking about an open cast mine and what's left behind that,
Mhm.
and fixing that and getting that functional again, or you're talking about some cropping land that's been degraded by conventional farming systems for 70 years,
Mm.
but there's still some soil present there and it hasn't been mined and turned upside down on its head entirely. two very different things to talk about. The mining one is a lot more complicated because we've disturbed it that much more. So I'm going to stick with the agricultural one, primarily because it's less complicated, but it also is millions and millions of hectares. And
Okay.
so therefore, that is the place where we can make the big impact.
Mm.
And yeah, so the simple method that we need to adopt is we need to stop being at war with our soil and our soil microbiology. Um, and if we stop being at war with it and work with it, that requires a change of farm management practices to practices that are soil health friendly.
Mhm.
And once you start to do that, this brings about remarkable results, as I said earlier, in terms of improving the soil and improving the function of that soil. And really, what that means is that, soil health needs to become a pillar. If you look at our Department of Agriculture, they've got various pillars with GDP contribution, job creation, etc., etc., etc. Okay, lots of them. Soil health is not one of the principles. So there's this core thing, okay? And now if you take that from the Department of Agriculture down to an individual farm, there are very few farms where soil health is on the list of pillars when it comes to decision making around that farm. And so if we do that, then we will start to be successful. We're very good as human beings. When we aim at something, we often get there. We've got quite a high chance of getting there. There's a comment, I don't know who it originally comes from. Somebody in the United States said, in agriculture, we're very good at hitting the bullseye on the wrong target. And the reason you have the wrong target is because you haven't put soil health as a pillar in your decision-making process. And soil health is something that people have understood. I'm talking about in modern times, in conventional agriculture, the decline in soil health and a lot of science and experimentation, both on farm and in labs, etc., has taken place to improve soil health. And that has evolved into what is known as the 5 soil health principles. And these are things, like minimum disturbance, for instance, is the first one. And these 5 principles need to be considered. When I am going to solve problem X, okay, how am I going to solve it? I'm going to solve it like this. How will that impact these 5 principles? Okay, well, can I solve it X minus 20% or X plus 20% and impact them less? And if we start to think like that, then we start to make better decisions, and decisions that are going to help us with all of this. And so in terms of farming correctly with soil, there are lots of different methods of doing this, different, with different names and different, slight different views on the best way to do agriculture. And I think that all of them can improve soil health. Actually, what's more important is how well you do them rather than which team you decide to be part of. The farmer needs to make that decision around their circumstances and their context, and then to do it as best they can. That is the method that will result in turning soil around.
Just as you were talking about farm management, I was thinking of almost like the difference between farm management at a more commercial level and farm management at a more indigenous level. Would you say that there's a difference there in terms of, soil health and making sure that the farmers are doing best practices between more commercial farms or more sort of indigenous farms?
It's the soil. The soil doesn't care. The soil The soil needs to be looked after, and it doesn't care, whether you are looking after it in order to make food for yourself and your family or your community, or food to sell to China. They don't care. Those soil microbes don't care. And you can do these different farming practices in a small scale, in a communal setting, in your backyard, in an urban setting, or on an enormous farm. And they're all applicable in those different things. As I said, it's just the circumstances and context of the individual as to which way best to do it. So if you take, for instance, the large scale row cropping, like growing mealies, you can go to smallholder farmers in South Africa who are practicing the same principles that big farmers 5Ks down the road are practicing. They're just doing it with a hoe rather than with a machine pulled by a tractor. But it's the same principle at the end of the day.
Thank you very much for that. So we've spoken about some of the successes, innovations that can be done. Maybe we can chat about some of the challenges that you foresee in implementing large-scale soil restoration projects and how we can overcome these.
So yeah, my challenges are summarized down to just two, and those are people and money.
Okay.
And then when I think about that, I actually say, no, well, it's just one then. It's people, because the people decide where the money goes. So that is our challenge. And it's like I said earlier, it's not knowing. And then once you do know, not doing. Okay, so we do know, at a lot of us on the planet, that we need to improve the ecosystem function of our planet, and that much of our behavior is negatively impacting upon that. And yeah, so that really comes down to people, and politics and what they decide. An accusation made by industrial agriculture defenders is that regenerative agriculture cannot be done at scale. It can't produce enough food for people. Well, I mean, I can take you to a 20,000 hectare cattle farm or a 4,000 hectare maize farm. I mean, how big do they have to get before they classified it being a scale? Those are pretty big scale to me. So yeah, I mean, that's once again a will. Like, the will is not there to see a solution. The will is just there to see a problem. And so I don't see scale as being a problem. There's some things that we're not going to be able to produce as much of. Well, then we might need to change how much we eat of those things. And that's, the nature of those things, that we are unable to produce them in significant numbers without having a unacceptable negative environmental impact. So that is stuff that we need to look at. And if we have the political will, we can do all of that. And from my side, at the end of the day, unless you see a future where a factory with nothing from a farm is making our food, producing water, producing oxygen, and stabilizing the climate. So unless you can see that as a solution, which I don't see that as a solution, I can't see it as a solution, then we have to regenerate millions of hectares of soil. That's the bottom line. And if we as a people decide to do that, we can do it. If we decide, farmers for the last X hundred years and have been paid for producing food, but in the future we're going to develop mechanisms to pay them for food, water, and oxygen, they will find a way. The farmers are people, and they are inventive, and they are motivated by the same things other people are motivated by. And so the question is what carrots are we dangling in front of the farmers? And who's in charge of the carrots that we're dangling in front of the farmers? And so, that's the question we need to resolve. Not can it be done at scale? Yeah, it can be done at scale. It's being done at scale right now.
Right. Thank you so much, Andrew, for this very stimulating and enriching conversation. We can definitely learn a lot from the work that you do. I really enjoyed engaging with you on all of the questions around successes, challenges, and the work that you're actually doing. So thank you very much. At this point, thank you. This would be the end of the formal part